This children's movie offers surprisingly deep critiques. It shows us what happens in a deregulated system, where the goal of making money steamrolls everything in its path, even collective well-being. A system where there are no real limits to that goal, and where everything, no matter how questionable, is done legally. Just like what still happens today in more cases than we'd like to admit. Today's video is about the movie Robots. Robots is a 2005 American animated film. Let's dive into Robots. In Robot City, life flows normally for its robotic citizens.
Until suddenly, Herb Copperbottom comes bursting out of the restaurant where he works. He's gonna be a dad. He runs home full of excitement, only to find out that his wife, Lydia, has already given birth to the Navy. But that's okay, because in the robot world, that means the fun part starts now, building it. They open the Build-A-Baby kit and dump all the parts on the floor. Herb, barely glancing at the instructions, though he does sneak a look here and there, starts putting his son together piece by piece.
After a few hours, countless parts, and a handful of mishaps, Rodney Copperbottom is finally born, a sweet little baby robot. Lydia looks at him with pride, already certain her son is destined for greatness. Of course, Herb makes some typical first-time dad mistakes, like accidentally yanking off Rodney's nose, but nothing a quick fix can't handle.
Rodney grows up, learns to walk using play wheels, and later receives his first big kid parts, hand-me-downs from his cousin. Father and son share joyful moments together, like watching the robot parade, where Rodney first discovers his idol, Big Weld, the legendary inventor. Herb speaks of Big Weld with admiration, and Rodney begins to dream of meeting him one day. When Rodney asks his father what he does for a living, Herb proudly tells him he's a dishwasher at a big restaurant. At home, Rodney watches Big Weld's show on TV with excitement. The inventor shares a powerful message. It doesn't matter if you're made of new parts, old parts, or spare parts. Everyone can shine. He also encourages young inventors to see a need, fill a need. Inspired by these words, Rodney begins working on his own invention, the Wonderbot. His early attempts are messy and chaotic, filled with setbacks and failures, but he keeps trying.
When Rodney enters adolescence, he receives new hand-me-down parts, this time from his cousin Veronica. He feels a bit embarrassed, especially when he shows up in the yearbook wearing feminine pieces. But even so, with effort and dedication, he manages to graduate, and that fills his parents with pride. Later, as an adult, he works with his dad at the restaurant where Herb washes dishes. Seeing how worn out he is, Rodney decides to help him out, so he activates Wonderbot, who starts cleaning dishes incredibly well. For a moment, Rodney becomes the hero of the kitchen, until the grumpy boss, Mr. Gunk, shows up. Wonderbot gets scared, causes a disaster, and the boss explodes in anger. He humiliates Rodney and fires him, telling him he'll never be more than a dishwasher's son.
But Rodney doesn't give up. That same night, filled with determination, he packs his things and heads to the train station. His parents catch up with him. Lydia tries to convince him to stay, but he explains he's going to Robot City to find a job, to help his dad and to prove he can be a great inventor. He wants to meet Big Weld and become somebody. Herb, excited, gives him his full support. He tells Rodney that when he was young, he wanted to be a musician, but gave up on that dream out of fear of not being able to make a living. He tells his son not to make the same mistake, to chase his dream and to never give up. With that hope in his heart, Rodney gets on the train to Robot City, promising to make them proud. When he arrives, everything is new, chaotic, and full of wonder. At the station, he meets Fender, a quirky robot photographer who takes pictures with no film. Together, they accidentally hop on a wild transport system that rushes them through a mechanical roller coaster all across the city.
After a series of adventures and jolts, Rodney finally arrives at the gates of Big Weld Industries. But instead of a warm welcome, he's greeted by Tim, the prankster gatekeeper, who, after laughing a bit, tells him that inventors are no longer accepted. Rodney realizes something's changed. Everything is now in the hands of Ratchet, a modern robot who's replaced Big Weld's values with pure profit. Spare parts are no longer made because they don't bring in money. That leaves less fortunate robots abandoned. Instead, everything is about upgrades because those do sell. But for robots to buy them, they first have to feel like they're not enough. So Ratchet launches his new slogan, "Why be you when you can be new?"
This animated kids movie, deep down, delivers some pretty powerful criticism.
Right from the start, there's a clear critique of an economic system that pushes for maximum profit without limits or regulation. Ratchet isn't doing anything illegal. He's just following what many traditional business manuals actually recommend.
Maximize profits. And how is he doing it?
Eliminating the production of spare parts for older robots that don't generate profit, and forcing everyone to buy expensive but superficial upgrades, not because they need them to live better, but just because they look better. And if you don't upgrade or can't afford to, then you're obsolete, doomed to be discarded or excluded. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Doesn't this sound incredibly similar to how a good portion of our current economy works?
Instead of addressing real needs, the system seems focused on creating new insecurities to then sell us solutions, and on generating a perception of obsolescence instead of promoting longevity or repair.
Because all of that promotes consumption. And the more consumption there is, the more profit they make.
Real needs and people's well-being take a back seat. Just look at how many industries operate today. First, they make you feel inadequate, too old, too fat, ugly, poor, unhappy, or out of style. And then they offer you a product or service to fix it. Isn't it curious how advertising images always show us unattainable ideals? Perfect skin, ideal bodies, material success, happiness, all packaged, edited, and put right in front of our eyes to plant the tiny seed that you are not enough.
Ratchet's motto could easily pass for a real advertising slogan. Why be you when you can be new? That message says, at your core, who you are just isn't enough. And of course, if they can first make you feel inadequate, they can then present themselves as your salvation. Don't worry, here's this miracle serum, this diet, this new phone, this brand name clothing, or this update that will make you the person you really should be. The problem isn't offering products that improve your life. The problem, I believe, is first creating an artificial emotional void and then capitalizing on it. And that's how the cycle works. First, a need that never existed is created, and then it's turned into a business opportunity. And that cycle, seemingly invisible because we've grown so used to it, is one of the most effective engines of the modern economy. That's why there's always a new update, a new model, a new trend, a new reason to feel like you're still not enough. It's like every time you reach something, the bar just gets pushed a little farther away. That said, maybe the movie is suggesting that the real problem isn't just Ratchet, but a runaway economic system. But I'll get to that later. Rodney walks into the hall, convinced he'll finally get to showcase his invention. But all he gets is mockery. Ratchet hurls Wonderbot out the window and has Rodney thrown out with a magnetic crane. Still covered in magnetic particles, Rodney wanders aimlessly as metal objects cling to him. An oxygen tank latches onto his back, propelling him into the air, and he tumbles into a trash bin, rolling all the way into a dark alley. Underground, mechanical sweepers haul parts to the scrapyard, a sinister factory where everything is reduced to junk. It's run by Ratchet's mother, Madame Gasket, a cold and ruthless robot. Ratchet arrives and tells her he's eliminated spare parts, leaving poor robots with no options. Gasket is pleased, but warns him that if Big World comes back, the robots will follow him. Ratchet scoffs, convinced there's no danger. However, when his mother compares him to his father, hanging like an old rag, he agrees it's time to take complete control of both the company and the city. He leaves proudly while his father, still chained up, wishes him luck in his evil plans. While Ratchet and his mother plot, Rodney wakes up inside a dumpster, just as Fender tries to take one of his feet. Rodney catches him off guard, and after a chase through barrels, he gets his foot back, though Fender ends up losing his head. Literally. At that moment, Crank, Diesel, and Lugnut arrive, Fender's friends known as the Rusties, who eye Rodney with suspicion at first. Piper, Fender's younger sister, also shows up, having rescued Wonderbot, and returns it to Rodney. Then, they all head to Jack's shop, the spare parts supplier, to repair Fender. But Jack gives them bad news. There are no longer any parts for him, only expensive upgrades. Fender sinks into depression until Rodney offers to repair him himself. With a few loose parts, Rodney manages to fix his neck. Everyone is amazed. However, the threat of the sweepers forces them to hide in the home of the huge and kind Aunt Fanny.
There, they find a shelter full of warmth, but also plenty of funny situations, such as the hostess's inevitable gas. That night, Rodney confides to Fender that he's afraid of disappointing his dad. He also tells him he considers him a friend. They end up laughing together, playing at making armpit noises, until Aunt Fanny lets out a blast so powerful it shakes the entire house. The next morning, Rodney wants to find out what happened to Big Weld. On his way out, he comes across a huge crowd gathered in front of Jack's shop. Robots of all kinds are demanding spare parts, but all that's available are ridiculously expensive upgrades that no one can afford. With a surge of courage, Rodney remembers that to help, he must use his talent as an inventor. He lifts his tools high and vows to fix every robot in need. One by one, he brings life back to broken arms, out-of-tune voices, and rusted parts. Before long, Rodney earns the respect and admiration of everyone.
Here, I want to revisit something I briefly mentioned before, but that's worth exploring more deeply. If we pay attention, we realize that Ratchet and Madame Gasket aren't actually doing anything illegal. Eliminating the production of old parts and selling only expensive upgrades isn't a crime in this society. Now, of course, there's a difference between what's legal and what's moral. Just because something is legal doesn't automatically make it right. The aggressive selling of upgrades, while clearly immoral in the context we see, still fits perfectly within the legal framework of the movie's world. But doesn't this happen a lot in our own world too? Companies polluting the environment, manipulating consumers, exploiting workers, committing endless abuses, and often not breaking any laws. They do it all by the book. It's allowed and even encouraged.
So, picking up on what I suggested earlier, maybe Ratchet and Madame Gasket aren't the real problem in this movie. They're just symptoms of something much bigger. A system that puts no limits on corporate power or the drive for profit. A system that ends up allowing and even normalizing abuses when they're good business. Maybe the true villain isn't Ratchet or Madame Gasket, but the lack of brakes. An unregulated system that rewards strategies prioritizing profit over well-being, with no mechanisms or checks to limit or balance the two.
And just to be clear, because people often misunderstand me, this is not an anti-business or anti-profit critique.
It's not about saying that the market or companies are inherently bad. What I'm trying to say is that when the sole goal is making money without clear rules, without social responsibility, without considering the impact it causes, that's when we have a serious problem. Because without clear and fair rules, the market, like any powerful force, tends to concentrate power, exclude the most disadvantaged, and perpetuate inequalities. When you let a system driven only by profit run wild without brakes, without regulations, without any minimum responsibility, we risk it consuming everything in its path. Meanwhile, Madame Gasket discovers that someone is repairing obsolete robots and orders them to be stopped. Pressured by his mother, Ratchet begins desperately searching for Rodney. Meanwhile, Rodney receives a letter from his mother with bad news. His father is deteriorating, and without new parts, he doesn't have much time left. With no other options, Rodney decides his only hope is to find the great inventor. Fortunately, Wonderbot gives them a clue. The inventor will attend the Great Welder's Ball. That night, disguised and very nervous, Rodney and Monavella manage to sneak into the lavish party. Monavella, overacting, pretends to be the assistant of a foreign noble to fool the doorman. But inside, Ratchet announces that the great inventor will not be coming. Meanwhile, Monavella enjoys dancing with Loretta.
Outraged, Rodney interrupts the event and accuses Ratchet in front of everyone. Security grabs Rodney, but Kaki, a high-ranking executive at Big Welders Industries, steps in just in time and rescues him. Rodney convinces her to take him to see the real great inventor. Meanwhile, Manivella says goodbye to Loretta, filled with joy. Alone on the street, he starts singing happily until suddenly a sweeper robot appears behind him, catches him, and throws him into the junkyard. Meanwhile, Rodney and Cappy arrive at Big Welder's house. Everything looks abandoned. The house creaks with every step until they find the original workshop, just like the one from the TV show they watched as kids. Blueprints, half-finished inventions, and dominoes. Excited, Rodney blows on one of the dominoes, triggering a massive chain reaction that forms a giant figure of Big Welder. Right then, he appears, surfing on a huge domino, as eccentric as ever. But he's no longer the inspiring robot Rodney expected.
He looks tired and discouraged. He tells Rodney to give up, that the world has changed and his time is over. For him, everything ended when the company stopped focusing on helping others and started caring only about money. He says Ratchet defeated him and will defeat Rodney too. It's best for him to go home and find another useless dream. Disappointed but still determined, Rodney replies that all he ever wanted was to be like him. Then he and Cappy leave.
Elsewhere inside the junkyard, Crank sees Ratchet and Madame Gasket discussing their plan to eliminate all the old robots. Terrified, he manages to escape, accidentally with a female body, determined to warn his friends. Back at the station, Rodney calls home. He tells his father that Big Welder isn't what they imagined and feels like he's let them down. But Herb reminds him he could never be disappointed, and that the dreams you abandon become a lifelong burden. Now it's up to him. Renewed and determined, Rodney hangs up just as the Rusties arrive, followed by Crank, who shares what he discovered. Ratchet is capturing obsolete robots and bringing them to the junkyard to destroy them. Everyone's ready to give up until Rodney stops them. He tells them it was a mistake to expect Big Welder to fight for them. If they want change, they have to make it happen themselves. And just then, Big Welder appears.
Inspired by Rodney's courage, he decides to join them. "I want to grow up to be like you," he tells Rodney. The group, now strengthened by Big Welder himself, heads to Big Welder Industries. There, before surprised employees and an unprepared Ratchet, Big Welder takes back control of his company and fires Ratchet. Ratchet attacks Big Welder, leaving him damaged, and orders him to be taken to the junkyard. But Rodney arrives just in time. With Wonderbot's help, he rescues Big Welder, sparking a chaotic chase through the city as he tries to repair him. After several jumps, crashes, and pursuits, they reach the junkyard. Crank thinks all is lost, but Rodney encourages them. This is their moment to shine and show what they're made of. He throws them discarded parts and they all upgrade for battle. Crank becomes an all-terrain machine, Manivula a dancing Valkyrie, Diesel a cowboy, and Lugnut a wrestling fighter.
The group bursts into the place to face Madame Gasket, who summons her numerous henchmen. But then Piper arrives leading an army of outmodeds, starting the great battle. Wonderbot manages to unbalance Madame Gasket, leaving her hanging in the air. Meanwhile, Rodney and Big Welder use a gigantic saw blade to destroy the sweepers. Ratchet is thrown into the air and ends up hanging from Madame Gasket. Trying to save himself, he lets go of the ropes, sending his mother straight into the furnace. He's reduced to an ordinary robot, hanging next to his father. The battle is won, the workers celebrate, the outmodeds are freed, and Rodney is hailed as a hero. But something important is still missing. Back in Rivet City, Herb keeps washing dishes until Lydia calls him. When his boss tries to stop him, Herb, fed up, rips off the dishwasher attached to his torso, puts it on his boss's head and walks out. The whole town and his son wait for him outside. Rodney hugs him and introduces him to Big Welder, who has brought crates of spare parts to help. Big Welder announces that Rodney will be his personal assistant and future successor. Rodney tells his father that although he couldn't give him much when he was a child, he gave him the most valuable thing, his faith in him. Now he wants to make his dream come true. He hands him a saxophone. The city celebrates the victory and a future full of hope.
In the end, Big Welder returned. Ratchet and his mother were defeated, and everyone celebrated. It's impossible not to feel a great sense of satisfaction. It seems like a happy ending. But not so fast. If we stop to think about everything we've discussed, did the core problem really get solved? Let's see.
Let's think about it. How did Ratchet manage to take control in the first place? To begin with, Big Weld was the leader, yes, but at some point, the board of directors decided it was more profitable to push him aside and replace him with someone who promised to maximize profits. And from a legal standpoint, there were no barriers to stop Ratchet's motivations in projects. As I said, everything was perfectly legal. Now then, when the movie ended, what really changed in that system? Yes, Big Weld came back, and Rodney is now his successor, but essentially, the company model and the overall system remain the same. Big Weld may be a good guy with plenty of good intentions, but what happens when another Ratchet comes along? What happens when a new board of executives once again decides it's more profitable to betray those values? There's no structural safeguard to prevent the same thing from happening all over again.
And it's a fallacy to think that replacing a bad person with a good person solves the problem. Because when the problem is the system that allows, incentivizes, and perpetuates abuses. In fact, this blind faith in virtuous leaders as a magic solution is something we see a lot in the real world too.
It's very tempting and seductive to think that everything would be better if we just had the right person in power. And let's be clear, I'm not saying leaders don't matter. Of course they matter. But if the rules of the game still reward selfishness, greed, and a lack of social responsibility, sooner or later another Ratchet will emerge.
That's why, as hard as it may be to accept, I believe a lone hero is not enough to change a system.
Rodney does something incredibly valuable, yes, but his action, while symbolically powerful, is limited. Relying solely on individual heroism, no matter how noble, is in my view a fragile solution because the problem is systemic. And to truly change systems, you need clear rules and mechanisms that can put a stop to abuse. In the movie, we don't see that happen. We simply put someone else back in power. Until further notice, the problem is not always the person on the throne. Sometimes the problem is the throne itself. If we don't change the structures that allow abuse, abuse will always find a way to return. But, well, up to this point, we've talked about a lot of deep and serious things. But I don't want us to end this analysis on a bitter note. Because despite everything, the movie also leaves us with a glimmer of hope. And I don't think it's a naive kind of hope, the kind that just sits back waiting for everything to fix itself, but rather a hope based on collective action. In the end, it wasn't a single hero who changed things. It was a team. It was the whole town. The Rusties, the outcasts, the old, the obsolete. Each one contributed what they had, how they could, and from where they could. They all rose together to stop Ratchet and Madame Gasket's plans.
So besides everything we've discussed, we can also take away this idea, a reminder of the power we have when we come together.
Maybe nothing, not even an unfair system, is unbeatable when people stand up together. Maybe changing the world, our society, doesn't depend on waiting for a great welder to come rescue us,
but instead, what we're willing to build together. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.